Caleb Thorne moved through his life with the disciplined economy of a man defusing a bomb. Each action was precise, measured, and stripped of any extraneous motion. His cabin, perched on a granite shoulder of the Colorado Rockies, was less a home than a forward operating base against the incursions of memory. The floors were swept clean, the bed was made with punishing, military-grade corners, and the single photograph on the mantel, a woman with a smile that could melt snow, her arm around a powerfully built German shepherd, was kept perpetually dust-free, a sterile monument to a life that had ended. He was 46 years old, but the grief he carried was ancient, a fossilized thing lodged deep in his chest. It had been 4 years since the accident that took his wife Sarah, and 2 since a Taliban bullet had claimed Rex, his partner, his shadow, his other self, on a dusty ridge in Kandahar. He had returned from that last deployment, a hollowed-out man, the warrior's armor welded directly to his soul, and retreated to this fortress of solitude. The outside world communicated with him primarily through his sister Chloe, whose weekly calls were a tactical exercise in emotional evasion on his part. She would probe, he would deflect. She would ask, he would answer in monosyllables. He knew she worried, but her worry was a frequency he could no longer tune in. The only other regular contact was his monthly supply run into the small town of Havenwood, a trip he conducted with the grim efficiency of a reconnaissance mission. He would acquire his targets, flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, and exfiltrate before the casual kindness of the townsfolk could breach his defenses. People like Eleanor Vance, the elderly woman who ran the general store, and whose eyes held a sad, knowing wisdom, were the most dangerous. They saw the cracks in his armor. This morning, the world outside his window was a swirling vortex of white. A blizzard had descended during the night, a brutal, roaring beast of a storm that had swallowed the landscape whole. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and snow piled in monstrous drifts against the north-facing walls of the cabin. For Caleb, the storm was a comfort. It was an external reflection of his internal winter, a physical manifestation of the frozen stillness that had claimed his heart. It reinforced his isolation, validated it. The world was dangerous and chaotic. His walls were safe and orderly. He had just finished his morning routine, a punishing set of push-ups and pull-ups, a cold shower, a black coffee, and was cleaning his rifle, the familiar weight of the steel and the scent of the oil, a form of meditation, when a sound snagged his attention. It was a faint, high-pitched cry, almost lost in the gale's fury. He froze, his hands stilling on the rifle's stock. He tilted his head, listening. The discipline of a decade in the SEALs had honed his senses to a razor's edge. He could pick a single, anomalous sound out of a symphony of chaos. There it was again, thin and desperate, a thread of sound snagged on the claw of the wind. An animal, probably a coyote or a fox, caught out in the open. Nature was cruel. It was the first law he had ever truly learned. His instinct, the one he had cultivated for years, was to dismiss it. It was not his mission. His mission was survival, solitude, the management of his own quiet war. But the sound came again, and this time it was different. It wasn't the sharp yip of a wild canine. It was a whine, a sound freighted with a misery that resonated with the hollow spaces inside him. He put the rifle down, his movements stiff. He walked to the window, wiping condensation from the cold glass. The world was an impressionist's painting of fury and white. He could see nothing beyond the immediate perimeter of his cabin, where the pines thrashed like tormented giants. He told himself to let it go. Whatever was out there, its fate was sealed. The mountain was indifferent, and so was he. He had learned indifference the hard way. It was a shield. He turned from the window and tried to resume his task. But the cry echoed in his mind. It was the sound of helplessness, of innocence, confronting the abyss. He thought of Rex bleeding out in his arms, his loyal brown eyes fixed on Caleb's face. A soft whine, his only complaint. The memory was a physical blow, a ghost limb aching with phantom pain. He swore under his breath, a harsh guttural sound. The disciplined walls of his fortress were being breached, not by an enemy force, but by a sound. A pathetic, miserable sound. With a sense of grim inevitability, as if responding to an order he could not disobey, he moved to the heavy oak door. He pulled on his insulated boots, shrugged into his heavy-duty parka, and grabbed a pair of thermal gloves. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes falling on an old sea chest at the foot of his bed. He knelt and opened it. The scent of cedar and lavender, Sarah's scent, rose to meet him. On top of a pile of neatly folded sweaters lay a cashmere scarf, the color of a winter sky at dusk. He picked it up. It was impossibly soft. He didn't know why he took it. It was an irrational impulse, a breach of his own rigid protocol. He stuffed it into his pocket and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical fist, stealing his breath and driving ice crystals into his exposed skin. The cold was a living thing, a predator with teeth of glass. He pulled his hood tight, his world shrinking to the few feet of churning snow visible in front of him. He moved with a practiced, ground-eating stride, leaning into the wind, his senses on high, alert. He followed the sound, a beacon of despair in the roaring white chaos. It led him away from the relative shelter of his cabin, towards a rocky outcropping that formed a shallow overhang, a place where the wind had scoured the snow down to the frozen earth. And there, he saw them. Curled into a tight, shivering ball against the unforgiving stone was a German shepherd. She was painfully thin, her noble head resting on her paws, her coat matted with ice and snow. Her breathing was shallow, a faint tremor ran through her exhausted frame. But she was not alone. Tucked beneath her, shielded from the worst of the storm by her own failing body, were two tiny puppies. They were whimpering, nuzzling desperately against their mother, who no longer had the strength to offer them either warmth or milk. As Caleb approached, the mother dog lifted her head. Her amber eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion, met his. There was no fear in them, no aggression, only a profound, soul-deep weariness and a silent, desperate plea. It was a look he had seen before in the eyes of dying men. It was the look of a warrior whose fight was over. That look shattered the ice that had encased Caleb's heart for 4 years. The cold he felt was no longer just from the storm. It was a deep internal thaw, a flood of emotion so powerful it threatened to drown him. He saw not just a dying animal, but a mother sacrificing herself for her children. He saw loyalty and love in its purest, most primal form. He saw the ghost of Rex in the proud line of her jaw, the ghost of Sarah in the fierce, protective love that radiated from her even as her life ebbed away. In that moment, the mission changed. His self-imposed isolation, his carefully constructed peace, it all became irrelevant. There was only the objective: save them. He knelt in the snow, his movements slow and deliberate, telegraphing his intent. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm here to help." He reached out a gloved hand, not to touch her, but to let her catch his scent. She watched him, her gaze unwavering. She did not have the strength to stand, but she managed a faint thump of her tail against the frozen ground. It was an act of trust so absolute, so unearned, that it felt like a judgment on the man he had become. He carefully scooped up the two puppies. They were so small, their bodies barely warm. One of them, bolder than its sibling, immediately began trying to lick his glove with a surprising ferocity. The other, a darker, more timid creature, simply trembled, its eyes wide with a fear that seemed too ancient for such a young soul. He unzipped his parka, creating a warm, sheltered space against his chest. He gently placed the puppies inside, where they huddled together, their whimpering quieting almost immediately in the sudden warmth. He then turned his attention to the mother. She was heavier than she looked, and lifting her was a struggle. She was dead weight. her body limp with exhaustion. He positioned her across his shoulders in a fireman's carry, a technique he had used countless times to carry wounded comrades from the battlefield. Her head lolled against his back, her breathing a faint, ragged whisper against his neck. The journey back to the cabin was a brutal, grueling fight against the storm. The wind tore at him, trying to rip his precious cargo from his arms. The snow was deeper, now a treacherous, clinging morass that sucked at his boots and strained his muscles. But Caleb didn't falter. He had a mission. For the first time in years, he had a purpose beyond simply enduring the next sunrise. He was no longer just a man in a cabin. He was a rescuer. He was a soldier. And he would not fail. Back inside the cabin, chaos bloomed. The sterile order he had so meticulously maintained was shattered. He laid the mother dog gently on the thick bearskin rug in front of the hearth, her body a stark, dark shape against the fur. The puppies, now squirming with renewed life in the warmth of the cabin, he placed beside her. He worked with a frantic, focused energy that banished all thought. He stoked the fire until it roared, casting a warm, flickering light that pushed back the storm's gloom. The light danced across the room, illuminating the muddy paw prints he was tracking across his clean floor, the droplets of melting snow dripping from his parka onto the polished wood. The mess was a sign of life, a beautiful violation of his empty peace. The mother was hypothermic, her gums pale, her body cold to the touch. He stripped off his wet outer layers and grabbed every blanket he owned, piling them over and around her. He remembered Sarah's scarf, still in his pocket. He retrieved it, the soft cashmere, a tangible link to his past, and gently wrapped it around the smaller, trembling puppy. The little creature burrowed into its folds, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He filled a bowl with warm water and a little honey, and dipping his fingers in, he gently moistened the mother's lips and gums. She was too weak to drink, but her tongue flickered out, a hopeful, desperate gesture. He felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years, a fragile, terrifying hope. He spent the next hour in a state of hyper-focused caregiving. He checked the mother's breathing, massaged her limbs to encourage circulation, and made a warm mash of bread and milk for the puppies, who attacked it with a clumsy, ravenous hunger. One of them, the bolder one, managed to tip the bowl over, spilling the contents all over the rug. Caleb, who would have once reacted to such a disruption with a surge of cold anger, found himself merely sighing and cleaning it up. The puppy, unabashed, licked the milk from his hand, its tiny sandpaper tongue a strange and wonderful sensation. He decided to call him Buddy. The other one, the quiet, watchful soul wrapped in Sarah's scarf, he named Shadow, for the way he clung to the periphery, his dark eyes tracking Caleb's every move with an unnerving intelligence. By late afternoon, the mother's condition had stabilized, the trembling had subsided, and a faint hint of pink had returned to her gums. She was still weak, but she was alive. She lifted her head and gave his hand a weak lick before nudging her puppies closer. Caleb sat back on his heels, the physical and emotional exertion of the day washing over him. He looked around his cabin. It was a wreck. Blankets were strewn everywhere. The floor was a mess, and the air, usually smelling of pine and gun oil, was now filled with the scent of wet dog. And yet, for the first time since he had moved here, it felt like a home. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the soft sounds of sleeping puppies and the steady breathing of their mother. The fortress had been breached. Life had poured in. He knew he was out of his depth. The mother needed proper medical attention. His supplies were limited to a standard field trauma kit. Reluctantly, he picked up the satellite phone, a device he used only for his weekly check-in with Chloe. He dialed the number he hadn't used in over a year, the number for the Havenwood General Store. Eleanor Vance answered on the second ring, her voice as warm and steady as a hearth fire. "Caleb, is everything all right? The storm is a terrible one." "Eleanor," he said, his voice rusty, "I need your help." He explained the situation in clipped, tactical sentences, giving her the assessment of the dog's condition. He didn't speak of the rescue, or of the scar, or of the profound shift that had occurred within him. He just gave her the facts. She listened patiently, without interruption. When he was done, there was a brief silence. "You did a good thing, Caleb," she said softly. "A very good thing. Dr. Anna Reed is staying with me. Her road is snowed in. She's the new veterinarian. I'll ask her to come with me. We'll get the snowmobile out. We'll be there as soon as we can. Just keep them warm." He hung up, a strange mix of relief and anxiety churning in his gut. He was letting people in, willingly. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. He looked at the sleeping dogs, a small, fragile family clustered by his fire. He had rescued them from the storm, but he had a sinking feeling they were about to rescue him from something far worse. The arrival of Eleanor Vance and Dr. Anna Reed felt like a full-scale invasion of his carefully guarded territory. They blew in on a flurry of snow and competence, their arms laden with medical bags, blankets, and a large thermos of what smelled like chicken soup. Eleanor, a small, bird-like woman with eyes that missed nothing, gave him a warm hug that he awkwardly endured. Anna Reed was younger, perhaps in her late 30s, with a calm, practical demeanor and kind, intelligent eyes. She didn't waste time on pleasantries but went straight to the mother dog, her movements efficient and gentle. Caleb found himself relegated to the role of an observer in his own home. He watched as Anna examined the dog, whom she called Sheba, murmuring to her in a low, soothing voice. She administered fluids with an IV drip, checked her heart and lungs, and cleaned the pads of her paws, which were raw and cracked from the cold. "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but her vitals are stabilizing," Anna announced, her focus entirely on her patient. "You saved her life, Mr. Thorne. Bringing her in when you did, another hour out there, and she wouldn't have made it." Caleb just grunted in response, uncomfortable with the praise. He had acted on instinct, nothing more. While Anna worked, Eleanor bustled around his kitchen as if she owned it, heating the soup and making tea. She moved with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. She set a steaming mug in his hand. "Drink this. You look like you've been through a battle." He had been. The battle had been against the thick ice of his own apathy. "The puppies look healthy, all things considered," Anna said, turning her attention to them. Buddy, the foolish hero, immediately tried to chew on her stethoscope. Shadow, still wrapped in Sarah's scarf, shrank away, pressing himself against his mother's side. Anna smiled. A bold one and a shy one. Classic pair. She looked at Caleb, her gaze direct. "You've got your hands full." "They're not mine," he said automatically, the words. Reflexive defense. "I just brought them in from the storm." Eleanor paused in her work, her back to him. "Sometimes, Caleb, the things we need find us, whether we're looking for them or not." Her words hung in the air, simple and profound. He had no answer for that. He watched Anna handle Shadow, her touch patient and gentle, coaxing the timid puppy out from his hiding place. She ran a scanner over the mother's neck. "No microchip. She's likely a stray, or was dumped. It happens more than you'd think up here." The thought of someone abandoning this noble creature and her babies to die in a blizzard sent a flare of hot, pure rage through him. It was an emotion so clean and sharp, it startled him. For years his feelings had been a muddy, gray landscape of grief and numbness. This anger was bright and alive. It was the anger of a protector. As the evening wore on, a strange domesticity settled over the cabin. Anna and Eleanor stayed, trapped by the unrelenting storm. They ate Eleanor's soup by the fire, the three dogs sleeping peacefully nearby. The conversation was light, mostly led by Eleanor, who told stories about the town and gently prodded Caleb with questions about his cabin, his supplies, his well-being. He found himself answering with more than single words, his ingrained reticence slowly eroded by the warmth of the fire and the quiet companionship. He learned that Anna had moved to Havenwood 6 months ago to take over the old veterinarian practice, seeking a quieter life after years in a busy city clinic. He saw the way she watched the dogs, her expression a mixture of professional concern and genuine affection. He found himself watching her, noticing the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the easy kindness in her smile. It was a dangerous observation. It was a feeling he had locked away, believing the mechanism to be permanently rusted shut. Later that night, after Eleanor had retired to the spare room he rarely used, he found Anna sitting by the fire, watching the sleeping dogs. Sheba's tail gave a faint thump-thump on the rug as she slept. "She's dreaming," Anna said softly. "Probably of a warm place, with a full belly. Thanks to you." "I just did what anyone would do," he deflected. "No," she said, turning to look at him. The firelight played in her hair. "Not everyone. A lot of people would have closed the door and turned up the volume on their television. You went out into that. You risked yourself for them." She gestured around the room. "And you let us in." For a man who values his privacy, I suspect that was the harder part. He had no defense against her perception. He simply stood there, a sentinel in his own home, feeling his armor crack under the weight of her simple, honest words. He found himself looking at Shadow, the quiet puppy, who mirrored his own soul. The little dog was awake, his dark eyes fixed on Caleb. He seemed to carry the weight of the world in his small frame. Caleb felt an inexplicable bond with the timid creature, a shared understanding of trauma and fear. He slowly sat on the floor, a few feet away. After a long moment, Shadow uncurled himself from his mother's side, crawled hesitantly across the rug, laid his small head on Caleb's knee, a cold nose on worn denim. It was a declaration of trust, an offering. Caleb's hand, a hand trained for combat and destruction, came up and rested gently on the puppy's back. The internal winter began to recede. A fragile, green shoot of spring was pushing its way through the permafrost of his heart. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of quiet routine. The storm finally broke, leaving the world pristine and silent under a thick blanket of snow. Sheba, the mother dog, regained her strength with astonishing speed, a testament to her resilient spirit. Soon she was able to eat on her own and take short, shaky trips outside, always with a watchful eye on her pups. Buddy, true to his nature, explored every corner of the cabin, with a clumsy, fearless enthusiasm, his antics providing a source of unexpected internal amusement for Caleb. He would pounce on dust bunnies as if they were mortal enemies, and engage in furious wrestling matches with the corner of the rug. Shadow remained Caleb's quiet companion, a constant grounding presence at his heel. Anna and Eleanor left as soon as the main road was plowed, leaving behind a wealth of supplies, instructions, and a lingering sense of warmth that felt foreign and unsettlingly pleasant. Before she left, Anna handed him her card. "Call me if anything changes, or even if it doesn't." The invitation was clear, and it sent a tremor of something that might have been fear, or perhaps hope, through him. He was becoming attached. The thought was an alarm bell, a warning of incoming emotional artillery. Attachment was pain. He knew this with the certainty of a combat veteran. His new life, this fragile ecosystem of man and dogs, was shattered 2 days later by the arrival of a county-issued SUV. It churned its way up his long, snow-packed driveway and parked with an air of official finality. A man in a crisp animal control uniform stepped out. His name was Officer Miller, and he had a clipboard, an air of weary bureaucracy. Someone in town, likely a neighbor miles down the valley, who'd seen the smoke from Caleb's chimney and heard the telltale sound of a snowmobile, had reported unregistered canines at his property. Miller was polite, but firm. He listened to Caleb's terse explanation of the rescue, his expression impassive. He inspected the dogs, making notes on his clipboard. "I appreciate what you did, Mr. Thorne. You saved their lives. But the law is the law." He explained the county ordinance in a flat monotone. Unclaimed strays, especially a litter, had to be surrendered to the county shelter for a mandatory holding period. They would be evaluated, spayed, neutered, vaccinated, and put up for adoption. It's for their own welfare, Miller said, as if reciting from a script. The words hit Caleb like a physical shock. Separate them? Put them in cages in a sterile, frightening shelter? The thought was abhorrent. He looked at Sheba, who had moved to stand between her puppies and the stranger, a low, almost inaudible growl rumbling in her chest. He saw Shadow press himself against Caleb's leg, trembling. They're not strays, Caleb heard himself say the words, feeling foreign in his mouth. They're mine. Miller raised an eyebrow. He just found them 2 days ago. You can't just claim them. There are procedures. You can file to adopt them, of course, after the holding period, assuming they pass the temperament evaluation. He didn't say what would happen if they didn't. He didn't have to. The shelter was overcrowded. A timid, fearful dog like Shadow, or a mother who was fiercely protective, might be deemed unadoptable. It was a death sentence delivered via paperwork. They're a family, Caleb insisted, his voice low and tight with a dangerous calm he hadn't felt since his last mission. You're not separating them. Sir, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just doing my job, Miller said, his patience wearing thin. I can see they're well cared for, so I'm not going to impound them today, but I'm giving you an official notice. He tore a sheet from his clipboard. You have 48 hours to voluntarily surrender them to the Havenwood shelter. If you fail to comply, I'll have to come back with a warrant. He placed the paper on the porch railing. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mr. Thorne. Caleb watched the SUV drive away, a plume of exhaust hanging in the cold, clean air. He looked down at the official notice, the bureaucratic black and white, a declaration of war against the fragile peace he had just found. A ticking clock had been set. He felt the old instincts surge, the combat mindset taking over. He was being threatened, his unit was being threatened. For the first time, he allowed himself to think the word, not just say it, family. This strange, broken, beautiful group of beings was his family, and like any good soldier, he would protect his family at all costs. The self-imposed prison had become a sanctuary, and now it was under siege. He would not let it fall. The ultimatum from Officer Miller hung over the cabin like a shroud. 48 hours. The number echoed in Caleb's mind, a countdown to a confrontation he didn't want but would not avoid. He spent the next day fortifying his position, not with sandbags and barbed wire, but with phone calls. He called Anna, his voice clipped and factual as he relayed the situation. She was quiet for a moment, then her voice came back laced with a steely resolve. He's just following protocol, Caleb, but it's a bad protocol for a situation like this. Let me make some calls. I know the head of the shelter board. Maybe I can reason with them. He felt a sliver of gratitude, an emotion he quickly suppressed. He couldn't rely on others. He had to have his own plan. His mind cycled through tactical options, most of them illegal and impractical. He could load the dogs into his truck and disappear further into the mountains, but that was no life for them. This cabin, this small patch of land, had unexpectedly become a home he was willing to defend. The irony was not lost on him. He had come here to be alone, and now he was fighting to keep his home from being empty. The day was tense. The dog seemed to sense his anxiety. Sheba stuck close, her amber eyes constantly on him. Buddy's playful antics seemed subdued. And Shadow, his quiet, soulful Shadow, became a literal shadow. Never more than an inch from his boot, the little dog's fear was a mirror of Caleb's own simmering dread. That evening, as a cold dusk painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of purple and gray, the unthinkable happened. Caleb had opened the door to let Sheba out for a final patrol of the cabin's perimeter. The puppies, as they always did, tumbled out after her. Usually they stayed close, within the circle of light cast by the porch lamp. But a sudden sharp crack echoed from the forest. A falling branch heavy with snow, or perhaps a hunter's distant shot. It was a sound that meant nothing, but in the heightened tension, It was a trigger. Shadow, already on a knife's edge of fear, bolted. He shot past his mother, past the tree line, and disappeared into the darkening woods, a small, dark shape swallowed by the immense, blue-tinted wilderness. Shadow! Caleb's voice was a harsh crack in the stillness. Sheba barked frantically, running to the edge of the trees and back, her distress palpable. Buddy whimpered, confused and scared. Caleb's blood ran cold. The sun had set, and the temperature was plummeting. When a puppy that small wouldn't last more than a few hours in the sub-zero temperatures that were coming. All the discipline, all the emotional control he had cultivated, vanished in a single, heart-stopping moment of pure terror. There was no thought, only action. He grabbed his most powerful flashlight, a spare coat, and the cashmere scarf Shadow had adopted as his own security blanket. "Stay here, girl," he commanded Sheba, his voice tight. "Guard the pup." He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He plunged into the forest, following the tiny, frantic tracks in the snow. The forest was a different world at night, a labyrinth of black trunks and deep, treacherous shadows. The beam of his flashlight cut a solitary, dancing path through the darkness. He moved quickly, his old skills taking over. He was tracking, not an enemy combatant, but a terrified member of his own unit. The stakes felt just as high. The tracks led him upward, away from the cabin, toward the treacherous north ridge. It was a place he actively avoided, a spine of jagged rock and old-growth timber where the snow lay deep and unstable. It was a place where he and Sarah had planned to hike, a plan they never fulfilled. The memory was a fresh stab of pain, but he pushed it down. He had to focus. The mission was all that mattered. The puppy's tracks were becoming erratic, showing signs of panic. He called out, his voice swallowed by the immense silence of the woods. "Shadow, come on, son, it's okay." An hour passed, then another. The cold was a physical weight pressing in on him, seeping through his layers of clothing. An old shrapnel wound in his thigh, began to ache, a familiar throbbing complaint. He ignored it. He found a spot where the puppy had clearly stumbled and rolled down a small embankment. The tracks were fresher here. He was closing the distance. He pushed harder, his breath pluming in the flashlight's beam. He was high on the ridge now, the wind keening through the skeletal branches of the trees. He swept the light across a tangle of fallen logs near the edge of a steep drop-off. And there, caught in the beam, were two small, terrified eyes. Shadow was huddled in a small hollow under a log, shivering violently. He was alive. A wave of relief so profound it made Caleb dizzy washed over him. "Easy, boy," he said softly, approaching slowly. "It's me. It's all right." But Shadow was too far gone in his fear. As Caleb got closer, the puppy panicked again. He scrambled out of his shelter, away from Caleb, and onto a wide, flat shelf of snow that jutted out over the cliff edge. It was a cornice, a wind-sculpted overhang of unsupported snow. Caleb saw it a split second before it happened. The puppy's minimal weight was just enough. With a sickening, soft whoosh, the ledge of snow fractured. Shadow yelped as the ground disappeared beneath him, sliding down a steep, icy slope in a small avalanche of snow and debris. He came to a stop 20 feet below, on a narrow ledge no wider than a foot, his fall broken by a scraggly, resilient pine sapling. He was trapped, whimpering, with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet below him. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. He couldn't go back for ropes. There was no time. The puppy was terrified, and losing body heat fast. He scanned the cliff face, his mind a cold, calculating machine. There were handholds, fissures in the rock. It was a dangerous near-vertical climb down, but it was possible. He didn't hesitate. He holstered his flashlight, pointing it down to illuminate the ledge. He began the descent, his fingers and boots searching for purchase on the icy rock. Every movement was precise, controlled. He was back in the Hindu Kush on a night insertion, the lives of his team depending on his every move. But this was different. This wasn't about duty or country. This was about love, a fierce, protective love for a small, terrified creature that had somehow burrowed its way into the most fortified part of his soul. He reached the ledge, his muscles screaming in protest. Shadow was huddled against the rock, face a tiny, frozen ball of misery. Caleb carefully unhooked the spare coat he had brought, shrugged it on over his own, and opened it. "Come on, son," he whispered. "Time to go home." He reached for the puppy. At that moment a voice echoed from the ridge above. "Thorn, what in God's name are you doing?" A powerful beam of light cut through the darkness, pinning him to the cliff face. It was Officer Miller. He must have come back to check on the situation and followed Caleb's tracks from the cabin. Caleb ignored him. He scooped up Shadow, tucking the shivering puppy inside his coat, zipping it up to create a warm, secure pouch against his chest. "Hold on tight, little guy," he murmured. The climb back up was exponentially harder, burdened with the extra weight and with only one free hand for long stretches. His wounded leg was on fire. His fingers were numb. Twice his footing slipped on the ice, sending a shower of rocks clattering into the abyss below. From above, Miller's flashlight beam stayed fixed on him, a silent, watchful eye. Caleb focused on the next handhold, the next foothold. He thought of Shadow, warm against his chest. He thought of Sheba and Buddy, waiting at the cabin. He thought of his promise to protect his family. He hauled himself over the lip of the ridge and collapsed onto the solid ground, his lungs burning, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He lay there for a long moment, the puppy a warm living weight on his chest. Miller rushed to his side. "Are you crazy?" the officer asked, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You could have been killed." Caleb slowly sat up and unzipped his coat. He pulled out the shivering puppy and wrapped him in Sarah's scarf, which he'd had in his pocket. He held the small bundle close, rocking him gently. Miller stared, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from the exhausted, snow-covered man to the tiny puppy being cradled with such impossible tenderness. He looked at the treacherous cliff edge, then back at the scene before him. The clipboard and the regulations seemed a world away. He had come to enforce a rule. Instead, he had witnessed an act of profound, reckless love. "He ran off," Caleb said, his voice raspy. "I had to get him back." He looked up at Miller, his gaze clear and unwavering. "He's my family. I don't leave family behind." The words, spoken with simple, unshakable conviction, hung in the frigid air. Miller was silent for a long time. He slowly knelt, reaching out not to take the puppy but to run a hand gently over his head. "Okay, Thorn," he said, his voice soft. "Okay." The battle was over. The war was won. The walk back to the cabin was a slow, weary procession. Officer Miller walked beside Caleb, his flashlight lighting the way, the earlier animosity replaced by a quiet, grudging respect. When they reached the cabin, the porch light was on, a warm, welcoming beacon in the vast darkness. Sheba was waiting, whining with relief as Caleb emerged from the trees. He placed the bundled Shadow on the ground, and the mother dog immediately began licking him clean, her love a powerful, healing balm. Buddy tumbled out, nudging his brother as if to say, "You foolish hero, you gave us all a scare." Inside, Caleb stumbled toward the fire, every muscle in his body screaming. Miller followed him in. The officer looked around at the messy, chaotic, life-filled room. He saw the bowls of food, the warm blankets, the way the mother dog trusted this solitary wounded man. "I'll file my report," Miller said, his tone now that of a man, not an officer. "I'll say I conducted a welfare check. The animals are healthy, well cared for, and clearly bonded to you. I'll recommend a special variance, given the circumstances of the rescue." He paused, looking at Caleb directly. "You'll have to get them registered, and get them their shots. Dr. Reed can help you with the paperwork." It was more than a reprieve. It was a surrender. It was mercy winning out over protocol. Thank you, Caleb said, the words feeling inadequate. Don't thank me, Miller replied, heading for the door. Just take care of your family. He left, and the cabin was quiet once more, filled only with the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of a reunited family. Caleb sank into his old armchair, every ounce of his strength gone. Shadow, seemingly recovered from his ordeal, climbed into his lap, curled into a tight ball, and fell asleep. Caleb sat there for a long time, his hand resting on the puppy's warm, breathing body, and felt the last of the ice around his heart finally, irrevocably, melt away. The weeks that followed, spring came to the mountains. The great heavy blanket of snow receded, revealing the sleeping earth beneath. Life returned in a rush of green shoots and birdsong. The transformation outside was mirrored by the one inside Caleb's cabin, and inside Caleb himself. The rigid, barracks-like order was gone, replaced by a comfortable, lived-in chaos. There were dog toys on the floor, a half-chewed boot in the corner, and a permanent, faint scent of puppy in the air. His fortress had become a home. Anna became a regular visitor. She would come up with vaccines and medical supplies, but she would stay for coffee. Her presence a source of easy warmth that Caleb no longer felt the need to resist. They would sit on the porch, watching the dogs play in the meadow below. Sheba, the noble mother, had filled out, her coat glossy and healthy. Buddy was a gangly, adolescent whirlwind of clumsy energy. And Shadow, while still quiet and watchful, had lost the haunted look in his eyes. He was Caleb's constant companion, a testament to the healing power of patience and love. One sunny afternoon, Eleanor Vance drove up in her old pickup truck, a casserole on the passenger seat. She sat with Caleb and Anna on the porch watching the dogs. You know, she said, her wise eyes twinkling, this town has been worried about you for a long time, Caleb. We're glad to see the lights back on. He knew she wasn't talking about the lights in his cabin. He found he could meet her gaze without flinching, without the need to retreat behind his walls. He could accept her kindness. He had found a new mission. With Anna's help, he started a small, informal network, a rescue for animals abandoned or lost in the harsh mountain wilderness. His skills as a tracker and survivalist were given a new, life-affirming purpose. The man who had sought only solitude found himself at the center of a small community, a found family of people and animals drawn together by compassion. That evening, as the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink, Caleb sat alone on his porch steps. The dogs were dozing at his feet. He reached into the cabin and brought out an old, worn harmonica case. He hadn't touched it since Sarah died. His fingers, sure and steady, opened the case. He brought the instrument to his lips and played a few simple, hesitant notes. It was a sad tune, a melody of loss and remembrance, but it was no longer a song of pure despair. It was a blues tune, filled with the quiet acknowledgement of pain, but also with the resilient, underlying rhythm of hope. He played for Sarah and for Rex, acknowledging the grief that would always be a part of him. But as he played, Shadow rested his head on his knee and Buddy let out a soft, sleepy sigh. The music changed. A new melody wove its way in, a tune of gratitude, of second chances, of a home filled with love. The rescuer had been rescued. The wounded warrior had finally found his peace.